Going from Genshin to Honkai Star Rail, I was not expecting there to be so much confusion over what emanators are. Genshin has vision bearers, and there is a very clear line between who is a vision bearer and who isn't. If you're a vision bearer, then you have a vision. Perfect, simple, easy to explain. Of course, how people get visions and what exactly visions are meant to be, that gets a bit murky, but defining the characteristics of a vision is pretty easy to explain. So you'd think that in Honkai Star Rail, emanators would be something fairly easy to explain too. And on the surface, it sort of is. After all, according to the databank, an emanator is someone who drew the gaze of an Eon and was more or less blessed by them. Sounds simple, right? Basically, anyone who's blessed by an Eon should be an emanator. Well, no, because nothing can be that simple. So let's dive in and figure out what the fuck an emanator is actually supposed to be. So to start us off, I did mention that the databank says an emanator is an emanator if someone has drawn basically the attention of an Eon, and on top of that has received some sort of blessing from the Eon. There are two people that are confirmed to be emanators. They are Herta and Acheron. Herta being an emanator of Nu, the Eon of Erduition, and Acheron being an emanator of Nihility. Now, of course, it's also mentioned that because an Eon recognizes someone and gives them power, it doesn't necessarily mean that they give that person the same amount of power. For example, the more hands-off Eons might not give that much power from their paths at all, while the more hands-on ones, like Lan, might open up their path to many people. Here's where things start to get tricky. The Nihility, for example, is often described as not exactly having any sort of consciousness, or it does, but it may not be super aware. It's described in the same way an eldritch monster might be described, consuming all things that falls under its shadow. So, in that case, how could someone become an emanator of Nihility? What are the criteria for becoming such a powerful being? For Nu, it's a little bit more straightforward. One receives an invitation to the Genius Society, Nu gazes upon them, completely destroys their psyche in the process, and then they become an emanator, at least according to Herta. So then, realistically, everyone in the Genius Society should be an emanator, right? Well, that also doesn't exactly seem to be the case. While the Genius Society is exclusive and enjoys some amount of notoriety, the fandom for Honkai Star Rail seems to disagree on who should be considered an emanator. And that's really where this all boils to a head. The fandom. Like with most things, fandoms can be a touchy place to start any kind of discussion. While there are lots of people who are interested in having conversations, there are also a lot of people who have way too much time on their hands and go absolutely feral when you say something they disagree with. While I try very hard to be the first sort of person, in the past there have been fandoms that I've been the latter, much to my regret. What makes someone an emanator versus what doesn't is something that spawned a lot of debate in the Honkai Star Rail fandom. For example, as I was playing through the Lawfu, it seemed pretty reasonable to me to assume that the generals of the Lawfu were emanators, because the game kind of uses language that hints in that direction. But the fandom seems to have decided that the generals aren't so much emanators as just people who have received blessing from Lan in the form of giant big fuck-off spirit monsters that they can summon. So now the question becomes, can people just receive acknowledgement and blessings from an Eon but not be an emanator? And if that's the case, then what exactly are the criteria to becoming an emanator? Because as previously pointed out, the databank says the only requirement to become an emanator is to receive the gaze of an Eon and be blessed by them. It feels like if that's the case, we should have a lot more emanators running around. I mean, technically, we as the Trailblazers should be an emanator, right? Because we've received the gaze of multiple Eons by this point in the game, so why aren't we an emanator? I think the main confusion comes from two main places: the wording of what an emanator is and power scale. At first glance, the wording of how to become an emanator is actually pretty straightforward, and when you dig a little deeper, it's actually much more wishy-washy than that. Each Eon interacts with the people of the universe differently. The Abundance gave the Xianzhou natives that visited them long life and the ambrosial arbor. In a lot of ways, this seems like a blessing, and it certainly is acknowledgement from an Eon. By that same token, when the Xianzhou became disillusioned with what long life meant, that being cursed with Mara, They eventually turned to Lon and became followers of the Hunt. This is when the generals gained power from Lon, and each of the generals are incredibly powerful, but again, the fandom doesn't seem to think that they should be considered emanators. The Eons themselves are very fickle beings. I mentioned this in my Eon vs. Archon video, but I think it bears repeating here. The Eons don't function like normal gods. Even the most involved Eons, like the Destruction and Lon, feel incredibly removed from humanity at large. They feel incomprehensible. I compared them to eldritch beings because realistically, at this point in the game, that's what they feel like. Where the Titans on Amphorius feel more like gods, the Eons feel like beings of unknowable power. Their thoughts, motivations, and actions aren't things that can be fully understood. So while the databank might say that an emanator is made in a specific way, perhaps instead there are other criteria for the Eons themselves before they determine whether somebody should be an emanator. And that criteria could be about things that we don't even know about yet. The databank often makes allusions to the idea that mortals are trying to ascribe meaning in the universe to concepts they can't even begin to understand. And because of that limited and often biased understanding, an incomplete view of the world emerges. Perhaps being an emanator is the same way. Mortals can only perceive an emanator through a limited and very biased view, which is why it can seem confusing in-game. The other big problem that makes it difficult to determine who exactly emanators are is power scale. We've seen feats of strength from people like Acheron and have heard of the Lord Ravagers, supposedly emanators of destruction, destroying things like galaxies. Any person with a weaker power set compared to these is going to make us feel like they can't possibly be emanators. We feel like emanators must be these insanely powerful beings, and if someone doesn't live up to the hype, well, it's tempting just to be like, oh well, they can't actually be an emanator, they must just be some rando who got blessed by an Eon. This, I feel, is a flawed way of thinking because it implies that all Eons are on the same power scale. There are some Eons that, in my opinion, are inherently less powerful than the others. A notable example being Lon. Lon, the Eon of the Hunt, is less powerful than, say, Sheepe of the Harmony or Nanook of the Destruction. Now, why is that? Because I know some of you are shouting that Lon has done some pretty amazing feats of strength, and Sheepe at least certainly hasn't. And before you all sharpen your pitchforks, I should explain how an Eon gets its power. It's stated that the more narrow a path the Eon presides over, the less power they have. The Hunt is about as narrow of a path as you can get, versus concepts like Destruction or Harmony, which encompass a lot under their purview. Due to this, it's reasonable to assume that any emanators of the Hunt would just be less powerful than emanators of the Destruction or emanators of the Harmony in terms of raw strength. It's also important to realize that an emanator of the Harmony would likely have a very different power set to, say, Acheron or the Lord Ravagers, and they might not even be combat focused at all. To fall into the trap of, well, this person couldn't cut through dimensions like Acheron or destroy a whole galaxy like a Lord Ravager, and therefore they can't be an emanator, is another limiting idea, something the databank warns against. So, to bring this full circle, what exactly is an emanator? The long and short of it is, we don't know. We have a very basic and limited understanding of what an emanator is, but the how, the why, and perhaps most importantly, how many emanators are out there, are things that are just still a mystery right now. Perhaps as Honkai Star Rail progresses, we will find more information on what an emanator really is, and how exactly one becomes such a being. I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, like, subscribe, comment, anything to make me feel like I'm not screaming into the void. And, as always, may your journey take you starward. But wait, there's more. Did you guys know that I started a membership tier over on Ko-Fi? It is $1 a month, and your username will appear in the credits of both my streams here and on Twitch, as well as my long-form videos. You should be able to see Agni Black, my current Ko-Fi member, in the credits here. I also do have a sticker shop with new stickers that have just dropped. So if you want some famous Kara sayings, you can go ahead and get stickers here. Anything that you guys buy helps support me and the goal I have of getting some upgraded stuff for my computer, as well as better editing software for a better viewing experience for y'all. If you buy the 6-pack or the 15-pack, you will be able to get a handwritten thank you note from me. I do ship internationally, and we accept PayPal as well as debit and credit cards now. So, yeah, with that, I will definitely see you guys in the next one.